Warning: this video contains my honest and sometimes brutal opinions. Keep in mind that these points are, believe it or not, still temporary, and I still have to play the game to see if they stand. Also, if you'd prefer to play Breath of the Wild without thinking about me, I suggest not watching this video. Again, it seems I enjoy to raise the flames regarding Zelda games. Thankfully, this is likely the last time you'll hear me speak of this game pre-release. Hey, what's up guys, RoberOnocle here. Yes, the same African American that made a huge scene over the ever so anticipated game The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild a few months back. Now look, by this point, most of my subscribers have seen my 3 videos that not too many people were happy about. If you haven't seen those videos, I'll link them in the description for you to check them out. We've been shown a lot of things since June, and I either want to change some things I said in the past, or add upon what I've already said. Also, to avoid any issues with this video getting released too late, I'm deciding to drop the emotes for this video. Don't worry, they'll be in the next main video. But enough side chatter, what are my views on Breath of the Wild 6 months later? Breath of the Wild, BOTW, Forest Fire Simulator, or whatever you want to call it, is an anticipated game that I've not had the best history with. It seems like every time I see something I don't exactly care for with this game, another issue shows up. A truly fascinating phenomenon it is. I am usually not one to be so critical of a game before release, but when you show us this much over the span of 8 months, you can pretty much get a good impression of what the game will be like. Do I still agree with the points I've made back in August? Most of them, but definitely not all of them. Some points were either debunked later or they simply weren't the best arguments. But that's to be expected from the type of videos I make. But let's not talk about the past, let's talk about now. Does Breath of the Wild look like it's getting better from all this content we've been shown? I'll give you the quick answer. Yes and no. As far as super big open world games go, the game looks great. If you're a huge fan of these types of games, then you're likely going to have one of the greatest experiences of 2017. And if you think of it as its own game rather than a Zelda game, you'll probably be even better off. But for anyone like me who's a big fan of how Zelda was before, it's not really looking too hot. In fact, it's actually a lot worse. But why, I hear you ask? Why are you so against the idea of a no-change Zelda game? Shouldn't this make you happy? Look, I appreciate that Nintendo is trying to branch out with the Zelda series, but the thing is, taking the most mainstream path is just not my idea of a Zelda game. But Robert, what is your idea of a Zelda game? That's a good question. Allow me to answer that by grabbing something I said to another YouTuber a while back about what made it so good to me in the first place. Keep in mind that this is slightly edited to make more sense within the context of this video. Yes, A Link Between Worlds is indeed an open world Zelda game, and you know what we got? No items and dungeons. No difficulty scaling with dungeons, so everything was easy. Not that difficulty is a major focus of the franchise, but even extremely easy titles such as Oracle of Ages had dungeons that got trickier and trickier every time. Breath of the Wild has 2 options. Either make every dungeon/section of the game the same difficulty, or just pull some all over the place bull. For the other point, dungeons focused on like one item. I'm not saying the game was bad, but it was a flippin' mess, that's for sure. But the thing about Zelda going down a Skyrim path, really not digging that. The thing I loved about Zelda games so much is that you almost always got a not too big world that had a lot to offer while having an organized and linear story. Now of course, the big worlds are nothing compared to games like Skyrim, but that's what made them great to me. You never had too much to do, so it never became a chore. Even games like Fallout 3 became chore-ish, because it was simply so big to the point I simply didn't feel devoted to looking all over a gigantic place to 100% it. While A Link Between Worlds messed up bad, at least it was 100%able within my own standards. Chances are that with Breath of the Wild, it would just be so big to the point I'll just go to heck with it and not 100% it. In my opinion, it's sharpening up upon what A Link Between Worlds did wrong, and that's a bad choice. Another thing to note is that even though we haven't seen everything in the game, that doesn't mean you can't get an impression off of it. It has survival elements such as having to hunt for food so you can heal yourself, and it has a weather system that can screw you over. A survival RPG is simply not what I know the series as, and hey, maybe you're cool with that, but I don't like it. As for difficulty, it looks iffy. Enemies seem to deal a ton of damage in certain areas, and I guess that's supposed to mimic Zelda 1 in a sense. I hope that not too many areas have these ridiculously strong enemies, because having to retreat several times will just be plain frustrating. Then there's the whole thing with the giant endgame overworld. According to Nintendo, what we've seen is only like a small percentage of the world. Again, those big worlds is what causes me to have a lack of a drive to 100% them, or even completely explore them, and my opinion on that will never change. Also, ragdoll physics being applied to Link. I will always hate that. This is supposed to be Zelda, not Just Cause 3. As for the statement that, if it's a Zelda game and it's made by Nintendo, it's still a Zelda game, I can never get behind that mindset. If Zelda was like Mario, where every game was just completely different, I really wouldn't care. All Mario needs is the ability to jump on foes and you can call it a day. Let's refer to another company, Capcom. Resident Evil 1 through 3 heavily focused on ammo conservation and horror. 4 had a focus on horror, but ammo conservation wasn't as big, so it was slightly more action focused. 5 and 6, on the other hand, just completely ditched the horror and went straight for action. And people really didn't like that because it was abandoning the series' biggest strength and purpose. It's why 7 was welcomed with open arms, because it actually went back to what made the original 4, or more specifically the original 3, so good. A series should be held to a certain standard, in my opinion, and that's what makes people come back to them. When you abandon those standards, you get problems like the Dead Rising 4 controversy. Don't even get me started on that. The thing with Zelda deviating from its oldest game is that the series pretty much decided not to roll with it and wanted it to be known for something else. Yes, Resident Evil 5 and 6 are still Resident Evil games, but the title means nothing to me if you're trying to do something else completely. Standards is what keeps a series different from others. If I wanted a grotesque, monster-ish action shooter, I'd go play Left 4 Dead 2. End quote. I'd like to elaborate upon that statement regarding it's a Zelda game made by Nintendo, so it's still a Zelda game. That is, honestly, one of the most toxic philosophies you could ever have about video games. Period. You see, the one thing I love about loving a video game series is that you love that series because of its identity. I love Doom 4 because despite being incredibly different, it stuck to the old school formula that made it good. I don't, however, care for Doom 3 because it wanted to drop the fast-paced, mindless action with its slow, horror-themed gameplay with reloading, a bunch of standing still, and a Half-Life style way of exploration. If I wanted a game like that, I'd just go play Half-Life. If id wanted to make a game like this, they shouldn't have slapped Doom over it just to make a few extra bucks. They should have made an entirely different game. Thankfully, they've learned from this mistake. Meanwhile, Zelda's over here making a game in which it's so different it's almost wrong. Minus familiar character designs, the series is taking a flip that feels like the equivalent of turning a coin over. I mean, come on, 120 dungeons, 900 Karak puzzles, weather that can screw you over, a world with no chains, and hunting food as a main source of health. Yeah, there's a good reason why me and another friend are calling this game The Elder Scrolls 6 Breath of the Wild. You'll probably never see me reviewing this game, not completed anyway. The simple style of open world gameplay is likely dead at this point, because now the series is being held to a totally different standard. And in all of this, Nintendo has the nerve to say this game was attempting to dodge Skyward Sword's mistakes, when honestly the biggest problem with that game was pretty much the lack of controller support. Seriously, the game's not perfect, but that game gets so many nitpicky complaints it's just stupid. So no, I won't live by the disrespectful philosophy that a game is a true game in a series because it was made by the same developers. You're basically okay with franchises becoming unorganized. Again, I have nothing against the games that go through gigantic changes. just changes that make them feel unfamiliar. Heck, although I'd take it as an RPG any day, if we had an Earthbound game developed by Telltale Games, I actually wouldn't complain much. You can still have the silly enemy behavior plus the super goofy, quirky, and emotional vibe that the series is known for without having a gigantic focus on gameplay. If Beginnings is your favorite in the series, don't bother objecting to what I just said because that game is nearly unplayable and most of its relevance comes from its story. But again, if we ever got a new Earthbound game, which will likely never happen, I'd always go with it being an RPG if it was up to me. But hey, who knows? Breath of the Wild is close to release. It couldn't get any worse.
It has pre-game DLC.
Welp, never mind. Zelda has apparently sank into mainstream hell. First off, the first wave of DLC is just awful. Second, that new hard mode concerns me. Stop right there. I can already see that, but it says new hard mode argument coming a mile away. Yet, you think I can't read or something? People are suggesting that this new hard mode is like a master quest, as in it likely completely rearranges how every dungeon and puzzle works. Yeah, all 120 dungeons and 900 Karak puzzles. I doubt you'd be able to just flip this on the fly, as you could just cheese your way through most dungeons by screwing with it. If it's a master quest, then that means that you'll have to do a total of 240 dungeons and do 1,800 Karak puzzles. I'm sorry, but I've gotta be blatant. That's just too much. If you already went through the Fire and Flames to 100% Breath of the Wild, why would you want to do it again, but even harder? I'm cool with a hard Zelda game, but there is such thing as, hold on buddy, you're going overboard. Either this or the game's just gonna mess with the interface some more or have enemies hit harder. If it does the latter, then I'm not even gonna waste my time buying it and just question why it wasn't put in the game by default. As for the new map feature, it better be one heck of a map feature if you have to pay for it, because that just sounds dumb otherwise. I assume the Cave of Trials is just like the Cave of Ordeals in Twilight Princess, but if that's the case, then why not put it in the game by default? Zelda games have had trial dungeons before where it was free, so why do you have to be charged for it now? As for the new story, if it involves another villain, I'm seriously going to question that. The Zelda series has had villains working together before, so if we do get a new one out there, I'm just going to ask why they weren't put into the main game in some way. And yes, I know that this pre-game DLC is cheap altogether, but that doesn't stop the fact that it's a bad practice. Think about it. If someone is ripping you off, but I'm also ripping you off but at half the price, does that make me the better man because I made it cheaper? No, it doesn't. But I feel I've been rambling on for long enough about this. So I'll end my thoughts on the pre-game DLC with a quote of a commenter's thoughts on it. It's quite telling that the overwhelming majority of comments in defense of this decision are written by people who have the typing style of a minor with no frame of reference in regards to game design or purchasing their own goods. When you're a child, you don't have to worry about the buyer's remorse. That's a burden for your parents to bear. And I'm sure I don't have to go into detail about minors, rather than adults, making up the vast majority of fanboys and fangirls of any given thing, who would defend it to the death without putting any thought into their comments. This is easiest to observe within gaming communities. As another person has pointed out, the cult of Nintendo is heavily apparent in these comments. But it's a full game and then the DLC is just extra. Hard mode, in-game clothing, chests containing useful items. Just sit back for a second and think about what's really going on before reflexively defending a company that does not care about you. End quote. I'm still sticking to my word back in August and buying the game, because I wouldn't want to break my word, would I? But regardless, Zelda seems like nothing but a shell of its former self now. And if this is the path that the series chooses to stick on, then my fellow Zelda fans, if you choose to stay with it, then I wish the best of luck to you. But as for me, I just might have to retire my title as a Zelda enthusiast.